What if you don't exist? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. What if everything you call you is just a temporary pattern, flickering in and out of something far deeper? Look at your hands. They feel solid, right? Real, certain, yours. But at the deepest level, they're mostly empty space, particles dancing in probabilities, not certainty. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is guaranteed. So here's the unsettling thought. If everything is just shifting possibilities, then what exactly is you? Are you a body, a mind, or just a momentary arrangement of something we barely understand? We assume existence is the starting point, but what if it's the result? What if you are not a fixed being, but a temporary event? A pattern that appears, stabilizes for a moment, and then dissolves back into uncertainty. Like a wave rising in the ocean, real for a moment, but never separate from the water. Pause for a second. If everything you experience is filtered, interpreted, and simplified, then how much of your life is real, and how much is just your mind trying to make sense of chaos? Drop your thought in your mind right now. Am I observing reality or creating it? Reality may not be as solid or real as we perceive it, and this idea challenges one of the deepest assumptions we carry without ever questioning it. From the moment we are born, we are trained to trust our senses. We touch something and call it solid. We see something and call it real. We hear something and assume it exists exactly as we perceive it. But what if all of this confidence is built on a filtered version of something far more complex? What you experience as reality is not the raw truth of the universe. It is a processed version shaped by your brain. Your senses do not show you everything. They only give you what is necessary for survival. Your eyes detect a tiny fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. Your ears pick up a limited range of frequencies. Your skin senses pressure and temperature within narrow bounds. Beyond these limits, there is an entire universe of information that you never perceive. So what you call reality is already incomplete. Even more unsettling is what happens when we look deeper into the structure of matter. Objects that seem solid are not truly solid at all. At the microscopic level, they are made of atoms, and atoms are mostly empty space. The particles inside them do not sit still like tiny balls. They exist in states of probability, constantly shifting and moving. This means the solidity you feel when you touch something is not a fundamental property of reality, but an emergent effect created by interactions between particles and forces. This raises a strange possibility. What if solidity itself is an illusion? Not a fake illusion like a trick, but a constructed experience created by your brain to make sense of something that is otherwise too abstract to grasp. Your mind turns chaotic, probabilistic interactions into stable, predictable objects because that is what helps you function. Without this simplification, the world would feel incomprehensible. There is also the question of observation. At the smaller scales, the act of observing seems to play a role in determining outcomes. Instead of having definite states at all times, systems exist in multiple possibilities until they are measured or interacted with. This suggests that reality, as we experience it, may not be fully defined until it is observed. If that is true, then reality is not just out there, waiting to be discovered. It is, in some sense, co-created through interaction. Now consider what this means for your everyday experience. When you look at a chair, you believe it is simply there, existing independently of you. But what you actually experience is your brain's interpretation of signals received from your senses. The color, shape, and solidity are not properties you directly access. They are reconstructions. You never truly see the chair itself. You see a model of it built inside your mind. This creates a gap between reality as it is and reality as you experience it, and that gap is unavoidable. No matter how certain something feels, it is always filtered, always interpreted, always slightly removed from the underlying truth. The world you live in is not the raw universe, but a version of it that your brain has made understandable. This does not mean nothing exists. It means what exists may not resemble what you think it does. The stability, clarity, and certainty you rely on could be surface-level features of something far deeper and more uncertain. What feels real is real to your experience, but that does not guarantee it reflects the true nature of existence. Human perception is limited, and this limitation quietly shapes everything you believe to be real. You do not experience the world directly. Instead, you experience a carefully filtered version of it. Your brain acts like an interpreter, taking in fragments of sensory data and constructing a coherent picture that feels complete, even though it is not. This means that what you call reality is not the full picture, but a simplified model designed for survival, not truth. Your eyes, for example, only detect a narrow band of light known as the visible spectrum. Beyond that lies infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, and countless other forms of radiation that exist all around you but remain invisible. If your vision were expanded, the world would look entirely different. Objects would glow, shift, or disappear based on energies you currently cannot detect. What you see as stable and familiar is only a tiny slice of what is actually there. The same limitation applies to sound. Your ears capture a specific range of frequencies, ignoring everything outside it. There are vibrations happening constantly, high frequency and low frequency waves that pass through you without notice. Other creatures perceive these signals and respond to them, meaning they experience a version of reality that is fundamentally different from yours. This suggests that reality itself is not singular in experience, but varies depending on the observer. Touch, smell, and taste follow the same pattern. They are not objective measurements, but interpretations. When you touch something, you do not feel its true nature. You feel how your nervous system reacts to interactions at a microscopic level. The sensation of warmth, texture, or pressure is not an inherent property of the object, but a translation created by your brain. In this sense, your body is not detecting reality as it is converting it into signals you can understand. Beyond the senses, your brain also filters information based on attention and expectation. At any given moment, there is far more data available than you can process. To manage this overload, your mind selectively focuses on what it considers important and ignores the rest. This means that large portions of reality are constantly being excluded from your awareness. You might walk through a familiar place and fail to notice details that have always been there, simply because your brain decided they were not relevant. Memory adds another layer of distortion. What you recall is not a perfect recording of past events, but a reconstruction. Each time you remember something, your brain reshapes it, influenced by current emotions, beliefs, and new information. Over time, this process can significantly alter your perception of what actually happened. This shows that even your sense of the past is not fixed, but flexible and subjective. Beliefs and assumptions further shape perception. If you expect something to be true, your brain is more likely to interpret ambiguous information in a way that confirms it. This creates a feedback loop where perception reinforces belief and belief influences perception. As a result, two people can experience the same situation and come away with completely different interpretations, each convinced they are seeing reality as it is. All of this leads to a profound realization. You are not passively observing the world, but actively constructing it. The colors you see, the sounds you hear, the sensations you feel, and the meanings you assign are all part of an internal process. Reality, as you know it, is shaped as much by your mind as by whatever exists outside it. This does not mean there is nothing beyond perception. It means that whatever exists is filtered through layers of limitation before it reaches your awareness. What feels immediate and certain is actually the end result of complex processing that hides more than it reveals. At the deepest level, matter does not behave in the stable, predictable way we experience in everyday life. What appears solid, continuous, and reliable is actually built on a foundation that is uncertain, fluctuating, and governed by probabilities rather than fixed outcomes. This idea becomes clear when we move beyond ordinary scales and examine the behavior of the smallest components of the universe. In daily life, you expect objects to have definite properties. A ball is either here or there. A switch is either on or off. Causes led to clear, predictable effects. This expectation forms the basis of how you understand reality. But when scientists began studying matter at extremely small scales, they discovered that these assumptions break down. Instead of behaving like tiny solid objects, fundamental particles act in ways that defy classical logic. Particles such as electrons do not have a precise position or path until they are measured. Before observation, they exist in a range of possible states simultaneously. This is often described as a probability distribution, where the particle is not in one place but has a likelihood of being found in many places. Only when an interaction occurs does one of these possibilities become actual. This means that at its core, matter is not made of definite things but of potential outcomes. This probabilistic nature is not due to a lack of knowledge or imperfect measurement. It is not that the particle secretly has a fixed position and we simply cannot detect it. Instead, the uncertainty is fundamental. Reality itself does not settle into a single state until an interaction forces it to. This challenges the idea that the universe is a fully determined system where everything is fixed and predictable. One of the most striking examples of this behavior is how particles can exhibit both wave-like and particle-like properties. In certain experiments, a single particle can interfere with itself, as if it traveled through multiple paths at once. This suggests that it is not a localized object moving along a single trajectory, but something more abstract that spreads out and explores possibilities before collapsing into a specific outcome. This behavior introduces randomness at a fundamental level. Even if you had perfect knowledge of a system, you could not predict with certainty what will happen in every case. You could only calculate probabilities. For example, you might know that a particle has a 70% chance of appearing in one location and a 30% chance in another, but you cannot determine which outcome will occur in a single event. This inherent unpredictability is built into the structure of reality. As you move to larger scales, these uncertainties average out, creating the stable world you experience. The randomness of countless particles interacting together produces patterns that appear consistent and reliable. This is why objects seem solid and events seem predictable in everyday life. However, this stability is an emergent property, not a fundamental one. Beneath it lies a constant fluctuation of possibilities. This realization changes how you think about existence itself. If the building blocks of reality are not fixed but probabilistic, then everything you see is the result of countless uncertain events combining into temporary forms. What appears stable is actually the product of ongoing processes that could, in principle, unfold differently. It also raises deeper questions about causality. If outcomes are not strictly determined, then the future is not entirely set by the past. Instead, it branches into possibilities, with probabilities guiding which paths are more likely. This does not mean anything can happen at any time, but it does mean that certainty is replaced by likelihood. The world you experience feels solid, continuous, and dependable, but this is a surface-level impression created by large-scale patterns. At the smallest levels, reality is fluid, uncertain, and constantly shifting between possibilities before settling into what you perceive as real. The idea that observation may influence reality itself challenges one of the most deeply held assumptions about existence, that things are the way they are, nesavissimo of whether anyone is looking. In everyday life, you believe that objects have definite properties at all times. A book on a table is assumed to have a fixed position, whether you see it or not. This belief feels obvious and unquestionable. But when we examine the behavior of systems at extremely small scales, this certainty begins to unravel. At the fundamental level, systems do not always have clearly defined properties until they are measured or interacted with. Instead of existing in a single state, they can exist in a combination of multiple possible states at once. This is often described as a superposition, where different outcomes coexist as probabilities rather than definite realities. These possibilities remain unresolved until something forces a decision between them. This is where observation enters the picture. When a system is measured, the range of possibilities collapses into one specific outcome. Before the measurement, you can only describe what might happen. After the measurement, one of those possibilities becomes actual. This creates the impression that the act of observation is not just revealing reality, but playing a role in shaping it. It is important to understand that observation in this context does not necessarily mean human awareness or conscious attention. It refers more broadly to any interaction that extracts information from a system. When a particle interacts with a detector, another particle, or its environment, that interaction can act as a form of observation. However, the fact that outcomes are not determined until such interactions occur suggests that reality is not fully fixed in advance. This leads to a profound shift in perspective. Instead of imagining the universe as a collection of objects with predefined properties, you begin to see it as a network of interactions where properties emerge through relationships. What something is depends on how it is measured and what it interacts with. Without interaction, there is only a spread of possibilities rather than a single concrete state. One of the most puzzling aspects of this idea is how it challenges the notion of independence between observer and observed. In classical thinking, the observer is separate, passively looking at a world that exists on its own. But if observation affects outcomes, then the observer becomes part of the system. The act of measuring cannot be completely separated from what is being measured. This does not mean that reality is created entirely by the mind, or that nothing exists without human perception. Rather, it suggests that the properties you assign to things are not always intrinsic, but can depend on the context of observation. The outcome you see is one of many possibilities that could have occurred, selected through interaction. Another implication is that there may not be a single fixed description of reality that applies in all situations. Different ways of observing or measuring can lead to different outcomes, each valid within its own context. This challenges the idea of an objective reality that is completely independent of how it is examined. As you scale up to everyday experiences, these effects become less noticeable. Interactions happen constantly and rapidly, effectively locking in outcomes and creating the stable world you perceive. Objects appear to have definite properties because they are continuously interacting with their surroundings. The uncertainty that exists at smaller scales is averaged out, giving rise to the illusion of a fixed and independent reality. What feels like a solid, observer-independent world may actually be the result of countless interactions continuously shaping and stabilizing outcomes. The role of observation is not just to uncover what is already there, but to participate in the process by which possibilities become realities. The universe may be better understood not as a collection of fixed objects, but as a system of interactions, and this idea shifts the way existence itself is defined. In everyday thinking, you naturally divide the world into separate things, people, objects, places, and identities. Each seems to have its own independent existence, as if it simply is on its own. But when examined more deeply, this sense of independence begins to dissolve, revealing that what you call things are actually the result of relationships and interactions. Consider something as simple as a chair. You see it as a distinct object with a clear identity. But what gives it that identity? Its shape, its material, its function. All of these depend on how it interacts with other things. Without someone to sit on it, it loses its purpose as a chair. Without light reflecting off it, you would not see its form. Without the forces holding its atoms together, it would not maintain its structure. The chair is not just an isolated object, it is a temporary stability created by countless interactions happening simultaneously. At a deeper level, the components of matter themselves do not exist as independent entities in the way you might imagine. Their properties are defined through their relationships. A particle's position, energy, or motion is not meaningful in isolation. It only becomes meaningful when compared or connected to something else. This means that what something is cannot be fully described without considering how it interacts with its surroundings. This perspective suggests that the universe is more like a dynamic web than a collection of separate pieces. Everything is constantly influencing everything else, directly or indirectly. Forces, fields, and exchanges of energy connect all parts of the system. What you perceive as stable objects are actually patterns within this web, temporary configurations that persist long enough to be recognized. Even your own existence can be seen through this lens. You may think of yourself as a fixed individual, separate from the rest of the world, but your body is constantly exchanging matter and energy with its environment. The air you breathe, the food you consume, the heat you emit, all of these are interactions that blur the boundary between you and everything else. Your thoughts and perceptions are also shaped by interactions, both internal and external. In this sense, you are not a closed, independent entity, but an ongoing process connected to a larger system. Time adds another layer to this idea. What you consider an object is not just a static thing, but something that persists through a series of interactions over time. A river, for example, is recognized as a single entity, yet the water within it is constantly changing. The identity of the river comes from the continuity of its pattern, not from the permanence of its components. Similarly, many things you consider solid and stable are actually processes that maintain their form through continuous interaction. This way of thinking challenges the idea of permanence. If everything is defined by interactions, then nothing exists in complete isolation, and nothing remains exactly the same from one moment to the next. Stability becomes a matter of degree rather than an absolute condition. Some patterns persist longer and appear more solid, while others change rapidly and seem less stable. It also reshapes the concept of boundaries. You tend to draw clear lines between objects, but these boundaries are often conceptual rather than physical. Where does one thing end and another begin? The edge of an object is not a sharp division, but a region of interaction where forces balance and properties change. This means that separations are not as absolute as they appear. Viewing the universe as a system of interactions emphasizes connection over isolation, process over static existence, and relationships over independent identity. What you perceive as distinct things are better understood as temporary expressions of a deeper, interconnected system that is constantly evolving through interaction.